Guys, today we are going to take some notes over seasons. I was really hoping we'd be able to do this all together in person, but we've got very little control over the weather today, so we're just going to take it as it is. So today we're going to take some notes. You will need a piece of paper and at least a pen or a pencil. If you want to bring colors, go for it. I love colors, so my notes will be very colorful, but yours can be totally just pencil and paper if you'd like. It's 100% up to you. So I'm going to turn my paper sideways like this, and I'm going to write the word seasons. So in the middle of my page, I'm going to draw a big yellow circle. Now remember, my drawing skills are not the best, so we'll just have to be a little bit patient with my drawing. This is a beautiful sun. Now, the sun we know is in the center of our solar system, and we've got 8 planets surrounding it. We're just going to focus on one planet, and that would be ours, the Earth. So I'm going to draw an Earth right here, but I'm also going to draw an Earth right over here, one up here, and one down here. Now, why did I draw 4 Earths? We only have one, right? I drew 4 Earths because this shows how the Earth revolves around the sun. So we spent lots of time 2 weeks ago talking, last week? 2 weeks ago? I don't remember. Talking about the Earth revolving around the sun. So we know that the Earth goes in a circle around the sun. We also learned that the Earth has an axis. Remember, the axis goes from the North Pole clear down to the South Pole. But this axis is tilted. So I'm going to draw a line tilted through my Earth. This line represents the Earth's tilted axis. So yesterday you learned about how there are some other planets in our solar system that also have tilted axes, such as Mars. Mars experiences seasons just like the Earth. They're a little bit different, as you learned, but it does have seasons, and that's because of the tilt. Our Earth is tilted about 23.5 degrees. I'm going to draw that same axis on all of my Earths here, because as the Earth moves in a circle around the sun, that tilt, it never changes. It doesn't wobble back and forth as we go around. It stays that tilted 23 degrees all the time. And of course we know that it's rotating as it's revolving, and we've got that rotated, tilted Earth going around the sun. I'm also going to draw one more thing to my little Earth here, and that would be this curve. We've talked about this little curved line before, but in case you can't tell from my fabulous skills, this little curve represents the equator. Now the equator is a little line basically dividing the Earth in half, with a top part and a bottom part, and we call these parts hemispheres. We have a northern hemisphere and a southern hemisphere. We live right here in the northern hemisphere. Some examples of continents in the southern hemisphere would be like Antarctica, Australia, South America, but we live in the northern hemisphere. So remember, the northern hemisphere is at the top, the southern hemisphere is at the bottom. Now, the next thing I'm going to draw is very similar to the gizmo that we did last week. I am going to draw some arrows. These arrows are coming from the sun, and they are hitting the earth. Now, I'm not really counting exactly how many I draw, but I am going to draw a handful. It looks like I've got 7 here. So now I'm going to draw the same thing over here, pointing to this earth. Now remember that as I drew these earths, they were not perfect circles. As I drew my equator, it was not perfectly divided. So, my drawing is not to scale. It's not perfect. But that's alright. I've got 7 arrows coming this way, 7 arrows going this way. What we want to do is we want to figure out what season we've got right here for the northern and the southern hemisphere, what season we've got over here, and we're going to use that to kind of figure out the rest of our drawing. So, up here, we'll start over with our left side. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 arrows hitting above the equator. And then 1, 2, 3. This one's kind of right at the equator. That one's a little wonky. But we'll say we have, we'll just do, even though we've got 7 arrows total, we're not going to count that top one. We're going to say we have 4 hits in the northern hemisphere. I'm going to make a little note right up here. I'm going to say NH equals northern hemisphere, because I don't want to write out the word northern hemisphere over and over. And SH is the southern hemisphere. That way I don't forget what my SH and my NH mean. So, I have 4 hits up here in the northern hemisphere, and I'm just going to count these bottom 2 because this one really hits right at that equator. So I'm just going to say 2 hits in southern hemisphere. Now let's go over here and count the same. We've got 1, 2 that hit above that equator. Again, my line is not great, but that's alright. It gets the point. So 2 hits in northern hemisphere. Then we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hits in southern. We'll just keep it the same. We'll say 4. We're going to ignore this middle arrow. I don't like that arrow. We'll just cross that little guy out. We'll say 4 hits in the southern hemisphere. So, thinking back to our gizmo that we did last week, we talked about how the more hits that a plate got, the hotter the plate would get. It's going to be the same thing here. So our northern hemisphere here got 4 hits, 4 rays from the sun. And our southern hemisphere only got 2. So how might that impact the weather? Well, over here we have more hits in the north, so it's warmer in the northern hemisphere. So this would be summer in northern hemisphere. And down here we got a lot fewer hits. This would be winter in southern hemisphere. We talked last week when we were doing MOSA about how summer, or how northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere have opposite seasons. Over here, we've only got 2 hits in the northern hemisphere and 4 hits in the southern. So this would be winter in the northern hemisphere and summer in the southern hemisphere. So now remember that the seasons are not necessarily tied to our calendar. So it doesn't mean that this is June in the northern hemisphere and this is December in the southern hemisphere. It's still June everywhere. But their June is cold, our June is hot. Our very, very cold winter right now this week, they're nice and warm in the southern hemisphere, even though it's February both places. So what would that leave these two as? Well, thinking about the seasons and the order that the seasons go in. After summer, we have fall in the northern hemisphere. After fall, we have winter in the northern hemisphere. After winter, we have spring in the northern hemisphere. Now let's look at our southern hemisphere. We have winter. After winter, we have spring. After spring, we have summer. And then after summer, we have fall. So, the reason for the seasons, right? We've talked about this with our gizmo, we've talked about it with our Mosamac, and now we've got some lovely, colorful, not so beautiful notes. Remember, when the Earth is tilted toward the sun, like we've got here, it's going to be summer. So the northern hemisphere is tilted toward the sun. It's facing the sun. This would be summer for us. Over here, this axis, or this southern hemisphere, is tilted toward the sun. It's facing the sun. And so that's why the southern hemisphere experiences summer while we have winter. We're tilted away from the sun. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I want you to get these on a piece of paper, put it in your binder, keep it forever because you're going to need it. We will have a quiz. I was hoping this Friday, but there are some other things I want to talk about, and having these snow days kind of threw me off. So we'll have a quiz beginning of next week. Make sure you understand this. Ask questions if you don't. Have a great rest of your day.